Lilith Blackwood drove through the familiar, quiet streets of Willow Creek, Vermont, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the sleepy town. Today was her 30th birthday, a milestone she had approached with a quiet, almost naive hope. She clutched a small, unassuming cake box on the passenger seat. $20, vanilla frosting, happy birthday, written crookedly in red icing. She hadn't bothered to correct the tired teenager at the bakery. It was, after all, just for her. Pulling into the cracked driveway of the house she'd called home for 3 decades, a strange, sterile silence hung in the crisp autumn air. It wasn't the usual quiet, it was a heavy, expectant stillness, thicker than usual. Inside, the kitchen lights hummed with a pale, unforgiving glow. Dinner was already on the table, the same predictable meatloaf, canned green beans, and boxed mashed potatoes. Before Lilith could even shed her coat, her father, Arthur Thorne, barked from his usual seat at the head of the table. "You're late." His voice was a grating dismissal she knew well. She set the cake box gently on the counter, the crinkling bag sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Worked late," Lilith replied, her voice flat, devoid of apology. "Had to finish some reports." Her mother, Evelyn Thorne, said nothing, just fussed with her fork, her gaze fixed on her plate. Arthur grunted, pouring himself another measure of whiskey into his chipped glass, the clink echoing their unspoken disapproval. The dinner commenced, a symphony of scraping knives, clinking glasses, and forced coughs. No happy birthday, no acknowledgement of her presence, just the mechanical rhythm of chewing. Lilith pushed a sad clump of potatoes around her plate, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. Something was coming. Arthur, never one to simmer quietly, slammed his fork down halfway through his meal, making Evelyn jump. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on Lilith with a look of disgust. "You're too old to be freeloading," he announced, his voice cold and rehearsed. "It's time you left." For a second the words hung suspended, surreal and unbelievable. Lilith blinked, glancing at Evelyn, searching for some sign of contradiction, a hint that this was a drunken rant, not reality. But Evelyn kept her eyes down, her lips pressed together, bloodless. "I pay the internet bill," Lilith said, her voice careful, unwavering. "The electricity, half the mortgage, groceries." Facts laid bare on the table, undeniable. Arthur let out a short, sharp bark of laughter that felt like a slap. "Paying a few bills doesn't buy you a lifetime stay, princess." The childhood nickname, once a term of endearment, was now twisted, weaponized. Lilith swallowed back the sudden ache in her chest. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, predestined. They had waited for today, of all days, to deliver the blow. Her birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. She pushed her plate away. The untouched meatloaf, the neglected cake, the suffocating weight in the room, it all sat like a brick in her stomach. Lilith rose slowly, feeling their eyes follow her, expecting a scene, perhaps tears, begging, a pathetic display to justify their cruelty. Instead, she nodded once, sharp, final. "Got it," she said. Arthur smirked, as if he'd scored some invisible point. Evelyn kept her head bowed, shame pooling in the slumped curve of her shoulders, but not enough to make her speak. Not enough to stop Lilith from becoming disposable. Lilith walked toward the stairs, pausing briefly by the counter where the cake still sat in its bag. One candle was missing, a small indentation in the foam of the box. It felt symbolic. One candle missing, one person missing, one family missing. She carried the cake upstairs without looking back, each creaking step loud, accusing, final. Closing her bedroom door, she leaned against it, letting the hollow thud echo in her chest. This house was never truly hers. Maybe it never had been. The silent reclamation, Lilith sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, staring at the half-packed bags she'd been too afraid to finish over the past few weeks. A part of her had known this was coming, perhaps not today, not so cruelly, but someday. She had thought she had more time, that she could fix it if she just kept giving. She peeled off her jacket, folding it neatly over the suitcase. Her hands were steady, mechanical, not from a lack of hurt, but because she was done. As she moved around the room, gathering a few essentials, her mind began clicking through logistics like clockwork. Cancel autopay for the utilities. Transfer her paychecks to her own account, not the joint one Evelyn insisted she keep for emergencies. Find a storage unit until she figured out the rest. They didn't just kick her out tonight. They forfeited everything she had given without asking for anything in return. Outside her window, the wind picked up, rattling the last stubborn leaves off the maples lining the street. Another reminder that winter was coming fast, and she wouldn't be here when it hit. As she zipped up her suitcase, Lilith caught sight of herself in the mirror. Same brown hair pulled into a loose bun, same tired green eyes, but something was different. A line had been crossed, one she couldn't uncross even if she wanted to. The cake sat on her nightstand now, looking absurdly small. She hadn't even thought to buy candles, not that anyone would have been there to sing. The smell of cheap frosting filled the room, nauseatingly sweet. She stared at the box, the lonely smear of icing visible through the plastic window. Then, without thinking, she pushed it off the nightstand. It fell with a soft thud, cake and cardboard crumpling against the worn carpet. "Happy birthday, Lilith," she whispered to the silence. The silence in her room pressed against her like a second skin. Her suitcase, half packed, gaped open as if mocking her indecision. The whole house seemed to sigh under its own neglect, and Lilith suddenly saw it for what it truly was. Not a home, but a place where she had been tolerated until she wasn't needed anymore. Her gaze drifted toward the crumpled cake on the carpet, its smashed frosting a ridiculous smear of childish hope. She tore her eyes away and stared instead at the dull gray suitcase, its worn handle slick from years of use. It wasn't just clothes that weighed down its contents, it was years of covering for their failures, patching their broken pieces while her own were left to rot. Memories surged forward like a bitter tide. She remembered when Arthur cracked a tooth during one of his drunken rages. He couldn't afford the surgery, not with the late mortgage notices piling up. So Lilith dipped into her savings, the fund she had quietly built for her own place, and paid for it in cash. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just a grunt when he got back from the dentist. Or the winter Evelyn's bald tires skidded off the road. Evelyn called Lilith in a panic, stranded outside town. Lilith skipped work, bought her a whole new set of tires, and even paid for the tow. Evelyn had patted her hand once, saying, "You're a good girl," before handing Lilith the repair bill she expected her to cover too. When the roof started leaking last spring, it was Lilith up on the ladder, hammering shingles in the pouring rain. Arthur sat inside with a beer, shouting about how you can't trust these contractors nowadays, while his daughter, whom he called a freeloader, saved the damn house from collapsing. None of it mattered. None of it earned her a seat at their table tonight. Lilith pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes until bursts of light flashed behind her lids. The sadness was still there, but colder now, calcifying into something harder to break. The floor creaked as she stood, grabbing her phone from the nightstand. Her feet carried her downstairs, steps soft out of habit. In the living room, the glow of the television painted her parents in an eerie blue light. Arthur lounged in his recliner, beer in hand. Evelyn perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, eyes glassy and distant. They looked fine, as if nothing had happened, as if tonight had been just another Wednesday where they shoved food into their mouths and pretended the world owed them something. Lilith stood there, waiting. Maybe a part of her still hoped, still stupidly clung to the idea that Evelyn would glance over and realize, that Arthur would sober up and remember who had kept the lights on when the checks bounced. But hope is a dangerous thing. And tonight it was dead. Arthur noticed her first, his lip curled in a sneer as he lazily raised his beer can. "Don't forget to turn off the lights when you leave," he slurred. "You're not paying for them anymore." The words hit harder than any slap. They weren't just kicking her out. They were erasing every sacrifice, every unspoken debt. Lilith didn't answer, didn't scream or cry or beg. Instead, she let the silence swallow the last piece of her that had ever needed their approval. She turned and climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last, the weight in her chest heavier than any suitcase. When she reached her room, she closed the door softly, pressing her palm against the wood, as if sealing off the part of her that had once believed blood meant loyalty. For a long minute, she just stood there, breathing in the musty smell of old carpet and stale memories. Then, with a steady hand, she pulled her laptop from under the bed and set it on the nightstand. If they thought they could toss her aside and keep living off the crumbs she left behind, they were about to learn otherwise. She flipped the laptop open, the screen bathing the room in a soft, sterile glow. Her fingers moved quickly, instinctively. Years of bill payments and online transfers had made the motions second nature. One by one, she pulled up the accounts. Electric, water, gas, all in her name. She hovered over the cancel button on the utilities portal, her finger trembling just once before pressing down firmly. The electric bill gone, the water bill gone, the gas bill gone. Each click felt like cutting an invisible cord that had kept her tethered here, in a house where love was measured in convenience and betrayal was wrapped in silence. Next came the bank account, the one Evelyn insisted they keep joint for emergencies. Lilith moved her remaining funds into a private account she had set up months ago, back when a tiny voice inside her warned that this day would come. Transfer complete. The cable and internet accounts were next. Services they used daily, mindlessly, never realizing it was Lilith's name on the bills. Her paychecks funding their binge-watching marathons and endless scrolling. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each click was a small reclamation of power they thought she didn't have. She paused briefly over the auto insurance. Arthur's truck, Evelyn's battered Camry, both covered under Lilith's plan to save them a few $100s a month. She could almost hear Evelyn's voice from last year, sweet and sticky, saying, "You're so good with money, honey. It just makes sense." Sure it did, Lilith thought, for them. She clicked remove vehicle on each one, her heart hammering in her chest, not with fear, but with a grim kind of satisfaction. When the last account was severed, she closed the laptop with a soft snap. The silence in the room felt different now, lighter, sharper. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about balance. They wanted her gone. Fine. But they would finally feel what it meant to lose the daughter who had held their fragile little world together with invisible thread. Downstairs, the TV kept blaring, a sitcom laugh track echoing up the staircase. Lilith wondered how long it would take before the lights flickered out, before the heater sputtered its last gasp, before reality crept into their little bubble of self-righteousness. She wasn't sticking around to find out. Tomorrow she would be gone, but tonight, she started pulling the first bricks from the foundation they had so carelessly built on her back. The glow of the laptop screen dimmed slightly as Lilith leaned back, her fingers poised above the keyboard. It was nearly midnight, and the house had fallen into a deceptively peaceful silence. Below her window, the oak trees rustled quietly in the late autumn wind, carrying with it the brittle scent of dried leaves and the first whispers of the coming winter. For a moment, Lilith sat still, feeling the ache seep into her bones. She wasn't just tired from the physical weight of the day. She was exhausted from years of carrying responsibilities that were never acknowledged. But exhaustion was a luxury she couldn't afford tonight. She cracked her knuckles softly, exhaled, and focused. First up was the electricity bill. Lilith had been the primary account holder ever since Arthur forgot to pay one winter, and they went 2 days without heat. Her password slipped easily into the login screen. Within seconds, she navigated to the payment section. Heart steady, mind sharper than it had been in years. Remove payment method, confirmation flashed across the screen. She clicked submit without hesitation. Next was the water bill. Same story. Lilith canceled the autopay, deleting her debit information with a grim sort of satisfaction. She wasn't just leaving, she was extracting herself surgically, methodically, from every vein that kept this household alive. Netflix was next. She almost laughed seeing the profile names. Dads, moms, even one labeled Family Movie Night, a joke considering they hadn't had one in nearly a decade. Delete account, internet service gone, cell phone plan add-ons gone. Her personal Amazon Prime account disconnected from the shared household address. Each click wasn't vengeance, it was survival. It was truth manifesting through action. After an hour, Lilith pushed the laptop slightly aside and pulled out a yellow legal pad from the nightstand drawer. She wrote down everything she had disconnected, everything that would stop operating once the morning sun crawled across the siding of this crumbling house. She needed to see it in ink, the final tally of everything they had taken for granted. As she scribbled the last item, a wave of old, unwanted memories washed over her. Late nights staying at the office 2 extra hours to scrape enough overtime together to cover a surprise heating bill. The vacations she canceled so Evelyn could replace her alternator. The birthdays she skipped celebrating because there was always something more important they needed from her. She clenched the pen tighter, forcing her hand to steady. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about refusing to be their safety net any longer. Scrolling through her bank app, she found the emergency savings account she had set up years ago. Back then, she naively thought it was wise. Something to ensure their family never had to experience another winter without heat or another summer without electricity. The account had Lilith's name listed first, but she'd made it accessible to them too, because family. She tapped the option to freeze the account temporarily. No withdrawals, no transfers. It would take them weeks of paperwork and signatures to even begin unfreezing it, and by then, Lilith would be long gone. As the confirmation screen blinked back at her, a tight knot in her chest finally began to loosen. She had given them everything: money, time, loyalty, chances. Tonight, for the first time, she chose herself. A new email notification popped up. Finian, her cousin. He had sent a quick message, a meme of a cartoon dog sitting in a burning room saying, "This is fine." No words, just that. Lilith snorted a humorless laugh. Finian, for all his faults, always knew when something was wrong. She debated replying but decided against it. She didn't want to drag him into this. He was family by blood, but he wasn't part of this decay. Some bridges needed to burn without witnesses. Instead, she opened a blank email draft, typing out a subject line in mechanical strokes. "You asked me to leave. Now, so has my support." She stared at the blinking cursor. Her fingers hovered over the send button, heart thudding once, twice, and then she closed the tab. They didn't deserve an explanation. They deserved the silence they had gifted her tonight. The clock on her laptop flicked over to 1:57 a.m. The house creaked and settled, and somewhere downstairs, a bottle clinked against the side of the sink. Lilith imagined Evelyn sitting on the couch, clutching her glass of wine, watching reruns like nothing was about to change. The heater clicked on, a deep mechanical groan rumbling through the floorboards. Probably the last cozy night they would enjoy for a while. Lilith double-checked every cancellation, every freeze, every disconnection, scheduled to activate at sunrise. Neat, clean, irreversible. By tomorrow, when Arthur flipped on the light switch or tried to microwave his coffee, there would be no electricity. When Evelyn went to pay for her morning groceries using the joint card, it would be declined. When the internet cut out mid-episode of whatever drama she was binge-watching, they would know. They would feel it. Lilith didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply felt empty. But it was the kind of emptiness that promised something better would fill it in time. At 2 a.m., she closed the laptop with a soft click and leaned back in her chair, staring at the shadows dancing across her ceiling. Her bag was ready. Her car, parked 2 blocks away to avoid suspicion, was already packed with essentials. Tomorrow she would leave this town behind, this crumbling shell of obligation and resentment. Tomorrow they'd wake up to a life without the daughter they never thought twice about. Echoes in the town morning light barely seeped through the cheap blinds of Sylvie Dubois' apartment when Lilith's phone buzzed angrily against the nightstand. Groggy, Lilith pulled the covers tighter around her, hoping irrationally that it was a wrong number. But a glance at the screen shattered that hope. 12 missed calls. Evelyn, Arthur, a few unfamiliar numbers, probably neighbors or extended family. Lilith didn't listen to the voicemails right away. She just stared at the list, feeling a complicated knot of emotions tighten in her chest. A twinge of guilt tried to surface, but she shoved it down. They made their choice. Rolling onto her back, she tapped through Finian's text first. It was blunt, straight to the point, like he always was. "Internet's down, no lights, Dad's furious." Mom crying. Lilith let the phone fall onto the mattress beside her and stared at the cracked ceiling above. It had begun, and she wasn't there to fix it. Not this time. A notification chimed, this time a voicemail. Curiosity got the better of Lilith, and she played it on speaker while she pulled on a sweater. Evelyn's voice soft and shaking. "Lilith, honey, there must be some mistake. You wouldn't just leave us like this. Please call me. We can fix whatever's wrong. We're family." Lilith closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words hang in the stale air. Funny how quickly freeloader turned back into family when the Wi-Fi stopped working. Another ding, a text from Arthur. "You'll regret turning your back on your family." No warmth there, no confusion, just rage. Lilith silenced the phone, turned it face down on the nightstand. Sylvie shuffled into the living room with 2 mugs of coffee, wearing an oversized hoodie and sleep-tousled hair. She didn't say anything at first, just handed Lilith one of the mugs and sat on the floor next to the bed. After a long sip, Sylvie said, "You look like someone just told you your winning lottery ticket expired." Lilith huffed a humorless laugh. "They're panicking," she said simply. Sylvie leaned her head against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. "Good," she said, her voice calm. Sometimes it's not betrayal to save yourself, it's survival. They sat there for a while, listening to the faint sounds of a garbage truck rumbling down the street. Later that afternoon, Lilith headed with Sylvie to a community event at the local church, a simple autumn festival with pies and pumpkins and booths selling homemade candles. Small town life in all its predictable charm. Lilith stayed near the edges, minding her own business. But it didn't take long for whispers to reach her ears. Arthur was there. He stood near the apple-bobbing booth, voice raised just enough to gather attention. Lilith didn't have to get close to hear him. "My daughter abandoned us," he barked. "After everything we sacrificed for her kids these days. No loyalty, no gratitude." Heads turned. Some nodded sympathetically, but others exchanged skeptical glances. It wasn't the first time Arthur had aired dirty laundry in public, and people remembered things. Sylvie nudged Lilith gently. "Don't," she murmured. Lilith hadn't realized she had started walking toward him. She stopped, forced herself to breathe, let him rant, let him play the victim. She didn't owe them an audience. Instead, she wandered past the booths, letting snippets of conversations drift by. Didn't her daughter pay for their bills for years? Isn't that the one who stayed home to help when the mom got sick? Funny how now she's suddenly the villain. The tide was turning slowly, like an invisible current pulling away from her parents. Control. Arthur and Evelyn could spin their stories, but real cracks were starting to show, and the town had a long memory. Later that evening, back at Sylvie's place, Lilith scrolled through updates friends had texted her. Photos of the house, the porch light out, uncollected newspapers piling up. A note that Arthur had gotten into a shouting match with the electric company representative in front of the neighbors. They weren't ashamed of how they treated Lilith. They were only ashamed they couldn't hide it anymore. As the sun set over the familiar rooftops, casting long purple shadows across the empty streets, Lilith stood by Sylvie's window and watched the town settle into the night. Somewhere not far from here, the house that once drained every ounce of her patience and love flickered into darkness. This time, Lilith didn't rush back to save it. The house slipped into darkness, and so did a part of Lilith. Yet, as the night stretched into morning, the world outside kept moving. People went to work, dogs barked at the mailman, kids laughed at the school bus stop. Life didn't pause just because hers had been cracked open. The unveiling of deceit. 3 days passed in a blur of trying to build a new normal. Lilith buried herself in tasks, organizing the documents scattered on Sylvie's kitchen table, scrubbing down the bathroom they shared, tweaking her resume for the 100th time. Anything to stay busy, anything to keep from thinking about them. But the mind is a stubborn thing. It was mid-morning when her phone buzzed again, that familiar vibration that sent her heart skittering against her ribs. She almost didn't check it. Almost. The text was from Evelyn. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. Dad's health is failing. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Lilith stood in the center of the small living room, the phone heavy in her hand, her stomach twisting into hard knots. The guilt came fast and sharp, carving into her like it had been waiting just below the surface. She sank onto the worn couch, reading the words again and again until they blurred. Images flashed uninvited. Birthday parties with homemade cakes, late-night talks in the living room, laughter over burnt Thanksgiving turkeys, childhood memories that didn't match the reality of recent years, but felt painfully real in this moment. What if they really were suffering? What if she was punishing them too harshly? The guilt slithered deeper as the day dragged on. It didn't stop with Evelyn's message. The calls started trickling in. Distant relatives Lilith barely spoke to suddenly felt entitled to an opinion. "You know your father's heart isn't strong," Aunt Beatrice's voice cooed from one voicemail. "Families fight, sure, but cutting them off like this, it's cruel." "Think about your mother," Uncle Robert's text insisted. "She's fragile. This could kill her." Each message hammered another crack into Lilith's resolve. Maybe she was heartless. Maybe she was the villain in this story. Maybe. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Finian. Short, brutal. "Dad told Mom to fake chest pains next if guilt-tripping you doesn't work." Lilith stared at the screen, the weight of that simple sentence knocking the air out of her lungs. So that was the plan. Not mending, not understanding, not accountability, just another con. They didn't miss her. They missed what she could do for them. Numb, Lilith tossed the phone onto the coffee table and curled into herself on the couch. The sun shifted across the floor, tracing slow, golden fingers across Sylvie's second-hand rug. As the hours slipped by, Lilith let the weight of everything press down, not resisting it this time. The years of bending over backward, the quiet sacrifices, the endless giving, hoping it would be enough to earn a seat at a table that was never truly hers. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder, sharper. She didn't move until Sylvie came home from her shift at the clinic, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the hardwood. "You okay?" Sylvie asked, dropping her bag by the door. Lilith nodded once, slowly, because she finally was. After Sylvie disappeared into the kitchen, Lilith reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts one by one. Arthur, Evelyn, Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Robert, every cousin and distant relation who had called to scold, but never once called to ask how Lilith was holding up. One by one, she hit delete. She didn't rush. She didn't cry. She simply erased. When she was done, she opened her settings and blocked every number tied to that house, that life, that false sense of belonging. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of mercy for herself. Lilith placed the phone face down on the table and sat back, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. Tomorrow would come, and with it, new battles. She wasn't naive enough to think cutting them off would end the war, but tonight she had won a small one. Justice and rebirth. When Lilith put the phone down after blocking every number tied to them, she expected chaos to fall away from her life like a heavy coat shrugged from her shoulders. Instead, there was only an eerie quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The first few days slipped by uneventfully. Lilith filled her time helping Sylvie reorganize her apartment, applying for positions in nearby towns, even cooking dinner for them, small acts of reclaiming normalcy. She thought maybe, just maybe, she had outrun the wreckage they'd tried to leave in her heart. Then it started. It was a Thursday morning, just as the fall chill began creeping through the windows. Lilith was sipping weak coffee from one of Sylvie's chipped mugs when her phone buzzed across the table. At first, she thought it was another job rejection. Instead, it was a message from Carrie, an old coworker. "Hey, you seen what your dad posted?" Curious, Lilith tapped the link. There it was, splattered across the local town's Facebook group like a festering wound. Arthur's words burned into her screen. "Some daughters are raised to be grateful. Some turn into snakes. After everything we sacrificed, our daughter left us sick, starving, abandoned. Pray for us." The post already had over 100 comments. Some offered prayers. Others, people Lilith barely knew, hurled judgment like stones. "Ungrateful brat," one read. "Parents give you life and you spit on them," another sneered. For a second, Lilith's hand shook so hard she almost dropped the phone. Sylvie glanced over from the kitchen counter, her brows pulling together. "Bad?" Lilith could only nod, pressing the phone screen to her chest like it might stop the ache rising in her. By noon, the wildfire had spread. Screenshots flooded her inbox from friends who still cared enough to send warnings. Neighbors, distant cousins, even former teachers commenting on how they'd always suspected something was wrong with that girl. Sylvie sat down across from Lilith, fierce calm in her voice. "They're writing your story for you." "Are you really going to let them?" Lilith stared at her, the words sinking in deeper than she cared to admit. "No," she said. "Not this time." She powered off her phone and turned to the drawer where she'd been keeping the folder, her insurance, her truth. Inside was a carefully kept record, years of receipts, screenshots, emails, bank statements, proof of the thousands of dollars she'd funneled into that house, into those people, without ever once demanding gratitude. Electric bills in her name, mortgage payments from her account, repairs funded by her overtime shifts. They had forgotten the cost because they had never paid it, but Lilith hadn't. She spent the next few hours scanning documents, organizing files. Every receipt was a memory, and every memory was a blade cutting away whatever pity she might have felt. By evening, she had built an arsenal, a neat, unassailable fortress of evidence. Sylvie peeked into the room, her voice low. "You going to post it?" Lilith looked up from the laptop, shaking her head. "Not yet," she said. "Let them talk a little more. Let them show everyone who they really are." Because Lilith knew something Arthur and Evelyn hadn't counted on. She wasn't rushing into battle with blind anger. She wasn't swinging wildly like a wounded animal. She was patient now, strategic. The small town they lived in thrived on gossip, but it also crumbled fast when truth surfaced. All she had to do was wait for the right crack in their facade, the moment when their lies grew too bloated to hold themselves up. And when that moment came, she wouldn't have to say much, just the truth. That night, as Sylvie and Lilith ate leftover spaghetti on the couch, Sylvie raised her fork toward Lilith like a toast. "To survival," she said. Lilith smiled faintly, lifting her own fork. "To never apologizing for saving yourself." Later, lying awake in the quiet of the spare bedroom, Lilith replayed Arthur's words in her head. "Some daughters are raised to be grateful." He was right in a way. She had been grateful. Grateful even when they starved her emotionally, drained her financially, erased her as a person. But not anymore. By the time she drifted off to sleep, she wasn't just surviving their lies anymore. She was about to bury them with the truth they thought she'd never dare say. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. Lilith sat at the small dining table in Sylvie's apartment, laptop open, heart hammering in her chest, but hands steady. The air smelled of leftover coffee and rain from the night before. Ordinary scents clashing against the extraordinary moment about to unfold. Carefully, she uploaded the thread. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was clinical. First, screenshots of her years of utility payments, power, water, internet, each bearing her name, each dated clearly. Then came the bank statements showing mortgage payments pulled monthly from her account, even when Arthur's paycheck had been enough to cover them. She included old emails between her and the landlord, messages verifying she had funded repairs that had kept the house standing through harsh Ohio winters. Finally, she laid out a brief timeline, the years she sacrificed vacations, birthday celebrations, even simple self-care to keep a roof over their heads. And then the ending, a simple statement. "When they asked me to leave, they didn't just lose a daughter. They lost the person who kept the lights on when they weren't looking." She hit post. For a moment, there was silence. Only the faint hum of the fridge broke the stillness. Then the phone began to buzz. It started slow. A few likes, some comments of shock, a few private messages from old school friends saying, "I always wondered why you stayed so long." Then the momentum shifted like a dam breaking. Dozens of shares, hundreds of comments. Neighbors, former teachers, even people Lilith barely remembered started chiming in. One neighbor posted, "I remember seeing her shoveling their driveway alone when she was 16 while her parents yelled from the porch." Another wrote, "Arthur always bragged about how he never paid a cent for household bills once Lilith got her job." Stories poured out like hidden wounds finally surfacing. It turned out people had seen more than they ever let on. They just hadn't spoken until someone dared to name the truth out loud. Meanwhile, Arthur and Evelyn panicked. First, Arthur tried to counterattack. He posted a brittle, furious status. "We all have misunderstandings in families. My daughter exaggerates things for sympathy. Sad, really." It backfired instantly. Underneath, commenters weren't buying it anymore. "Funny how you never posted about her paying your bills until now," someone snarked. "You don't look too sick cashing her checks," another added, brutal in its honesty. Then Evelyn tried a different tactic, pity. Voicemail after voicemail filled Lilith's inbox. "Lilith, please. Your father isn't well. I didn't know he was going to post that. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Please take it down before people think badly of us." There was a time when that pleading tone would have shattered Lilith. Not anymore. She knew now it wasn't about regret. It was about reputation. That afternoon, Sylvie and Lilith walked down to the fall festival at the town square. The crisp air smelled of caramel apples and hay. Children squealed from the bounce houses. The old brass band tuned up on the stage by the courthouse steps. Lilith felt eyes on her the second she arrived. It wasn't hostility anymore. It was something softer, sadder, a kind of collective realization. She passed by Mrs. Jenkins, her old elementary teacher, Mrs. Jenkins gave her a nod and a small, sad smile. Mr. Thomas from the hardware store tipped his cap silently. Finally, as Sylvie and Lilith neared the pumpkin carving station, a woman Lilith barely knew, one of Evelyn's old church friends, stepped forward. Her hand was gentle as she touched Lilith's shoulder. "You deserved better, sweetheart," she said quietly. "We all knew. We were just too afraid to say it." Tears stung the back of Lilith's eyes, but she blinked them away. She nodded, murmuring a soft thank you that seemed too small for the weight it carried. Standing there, in the heart of the community where she had once been invisible, Lilith realized something with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. The shame was never hers. It had been theirs all along. As the afternoon faded into evening, the square lit up with strings of fairy lights, and the smell of roasted corn filled the air. Children laughed, music played, and for once Lilith didn't feel like an outsider lurking at the edges. She belonged to herself now. Later that night, as fireworks exploded over the courthouse lawn in bursts of red and gold, Lilith stood still, head tilted back, watching the sky tear itself open in color. A soft voice whispered inside her, "Sometimes the brightest displays come only after the darkest storms." And this time, she wasn't running from the wreckage, she was rising from it. Justice and rebirth. The smell of burnt leaves drifted through the air as Lilith leaned against the frame of Sylvie's apartment window, watching the small town settle into another cool autumn evening. Life outside looked untouched, unaware that hers was teetering on the edge of yet another battlefront. 2 days had passed since she posted the truth. She had almost let herself believe it was over, that maybe, just maybe, silence would be the final word between them. Then came the knock. It wasn't frantic or violent, just a polite, almost embarrassed rap against the door. Lilith glanced at Sylvie, who peered over her coffee mug, brow furrowed. Crossing the small living room, Lilith opened the door to find a uniformed officer standing there holding a large manila envelope. "Miss Lilith Blackwood?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Yes," Lilith answered, a knot already forming in her stomach. He handed over the envelope. "You've been served. Civil suit. Any questions?" "The contacts are listed inside." Lilith thanked him mechanically, closed the door with a soft click, and stared down at the envelope like it might bite. She didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Sitting down at the kitchen table, she slid her finger under the flap and unfolded the papers inside. Arthur had filed a lawsuit against her. The charges were laughable if they hadn't been so cruel. Theft, emotional elder abuse, financial abandonment. It was a tantrum dressed up in legal ease. Sylvie read over her shoulder, muttering, "Unbelievable. They're trying to destroy you because you walked away." For a brief moment, that old familiar guilt flared, hot and sharp like a reopened wound. The same voice that had haunted her since childhood whispered, "Maybe you're making too much of this. Maybe you should have just stayed quiet." But that voice had lost its power. Instead of spiraling, Lilith inhaled slowly, feeling the solid ground of truth beneath her feet. "Not this time," she said aloud, standing up. "I'm done apologizing for saving myself." By noon, Lilith was on the phone with a legal aid office in Columbus. She explained everything methodically, calmly, forwarded them the proof she had already compiled. Every payment, every receipt, every documented act of support. They listened, asked careful questions, then assured her they would help draft a countersuit if needed. "You have a strong case," the paralegal said. "And honestly, it sounds like you should be the one suing for exploitation." Lilith didn't want revenge. She wanted her life back. That afternoon, she took their advice and filed her own formal complaints, this time outlining years of financial manipulation under emotional coercion. Elder abuse, it turned out, went both ways when adult children were weaponized for labor and money under the threat of guilt. The backlash was swift. Evelyn called first, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "Lilith, please. You're tearing this family apart. We only wanted what was best for you. You're overreacting. You know your father's not well." Lilith didn't respond. An hour later, Arthur's text came in, a final poison dart. "You think you won?" "Family always gets the last word." Lilith stared at it for a long time, the words blurring slightly as anger and pity warred inside her. Then she opened the small drawer beside her bed. Tucked in the corner, wrapped carefully in a tissue, was the tiny plastic cake topper she'd bought herself on her last birthday, the birthday they had turned into an eviction party, a single candle, a broken memory. She turned it over in her hand, feeling the absurdity of how much hope had once been packed into such a small, meaningless object. "Family isn't who you're born to," she whispered into the quiet room. "It's who treats you like you matter." 2 days later, Lilith found herself standing outside the police station, legal papers in her hand, flanked by a volunteer advocate from the aid office. The building was gray and square, no more imposing than a post office. Yet, the weight of what it represented settled heavy on her shoulders. Inside, Arthur sat rigidly at a battered wooden table, Evelyn beside him, her hands twisting the strap of her handbag. They looked smaller than Lilith remembered, angrier, weaker. An officer calmly explained that if they pursued the false charges, they could be countersued for defamation and financial abuse. Charges that could stick with the evidence Lilith held. Arthur's face turned an alarming shade of red. He shoved his chair back, rattling it against the floor. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped at the officer. "She's manipulating everyone." No one responded. Evelyn crumbled into her seat, sobbing so loudly it echoed off the cinder block walls. Lilith didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. As they stormed out, the officer turned to Lilith and said quietly, "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Outside, the sun was shockingly bright against the cool autumn sky. Lilith stood there for a moment, letting the light soak into her skin, the courthouse looming behind her, the town stretching ahead. The air smelled crisp, alive, like endings and beginnings all tangled together. With every step away from that building, the weight she had carried for decades lifted a little more. No more explaining, no more guilt, no more apologies. As she crossed the parking lot, a gust of wind picked up fallen leaves and sent them swirling around her boots. It was as if the world itself was brushing away the last remnants of a life that no longer belonged to her. The courthouse grew smaller in her rearview mirror as she pulled onto the main road, windows down, letting the crisp fall air wash through the car like a baptism. For the first time in longer than she cared to admit, her heart didn't feel like it was dragging a boulder behind it. No phone vibrating with guilt-laced voicemails. No text demanding apologies she didn't owe. No more pulling herself apart trying to stitch a family together that had never really included her. She was free. But freedom, Lilith realized, was quieter than she expected. She spent the next few days at Sylvie's apartment, moving through the small routines of life, making coffee, folding laundry, walking to the corner store for milk. Ordinary things done without looking over her shoulder, without waiting for someone to bark an order, toss a bill her way, or remind her that she owed them for existing. It felt foreign and precious. One morning, sitting at the tiny kitchen table with her laptop open, Lilith stumbled across an ad for a small rental unit downtown. Nothing fancy, an aging brick building with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it was hers if she wanted it, and for once, she did. By noon, she'd signed the lease. She didn't tell anyone except Sylvie. Sylvie smiled, handing her a chipped coffee mug to toast with. "To new beginnings," she said simply. "To finally choosing myself," Lilith added. The next weeks blurred into a soft, golden rhythm. Lilith bought secondhand furniture piece by piece. A couch with sun-faded cushions, a wobbly kitchen table someone had loved before her. She painted the walls pale blue, the color of open skies and deep breaths. At night, she would sit by the single living room window, watching the town lights blink on and off like distant stars. And somewhere between one breath and the next, she realized the silence no longer felt empty, it felt earned. One Saturday, while unpacking a final box, Lilith found it tucked away at the bottom. A relic from another life. The tiny plastic cake topper, the one from the birthday that had ended everything. She held it in her palm for a long while, the late afternoon sun glinting off its cheap, bent edge. It didn't hurt to look at it anymore. It didn't feel like a reminder of what she lost. It felt like proof of what she survived. She placed it on a shelf above her desk, a small private trophy, not to honor the people who hurt her, but to honor the girl who didn't let it destroy her. Sometime later, a card slipped under her door, no return address. Inside, a short note in careful handwriting. "You were never the problem. Some people just fear the ones they can't control." Lilith never found out who sent it. She didn't need to, because she already knew the truth, the final truth. Family isn't something you earn by sacrifice. It's something you're given freely or not at all. And in their absence, she was building something they could never take from her. Peace, self-respect. A life stitched together not from obligation, but from choice. As she sat by her window that night, city lights glowing softly below, she smiled to herself and whispered the words she had waited her whole life to believe. "I am enough." Sometimes walking away from the people who raised you is the only way to become the person you were meant to be. Blood may tie us together, but respect, trust, and kindness are what make a true family.